it's Miss McConnell. I'm here for some more story time, so we are going to continue with Sideways Stories for Wayside School, and we are almost halfway up. We're on chapter 14, so remember there's 30 classrooms, so one for one, and there's 30 stories like stacked on top of each other, and in this book there's also 30 stories about all of the kids. So we are on 14. It's pretty good. This one's called Sammy. Look at that picture. What? Who's Sammy? It was a horrible, stinky, rainy day. Some rainy days are fun and exciting, but not this one. This one stunk. All the children were wet and wore smelly raincoats. The whole room smelled awful. "Whew, it stinks in here," said Mauricia. Everybody laughed, but she was right. There was one good thing, however. There was a new boy in class. New kids are always fun, except no one could even tell what the new boy looked like. He was completely covered by his raincoat. "Class," said Mrs. Jules, "I'd like you all to meet Sammy. Let us show him what a nice class we can be." Leslie walked up and smiled at Sammy, but her smile quickly turned into a frown. "You smell terrible," she said. "Leslie!" exclaimed Mrs. Jules. "That's no way to greet a new member of our class." Mrs. Jules wrote Leslie's name on the blackboard, under the word discipline. "But he does, Mrs. Jules," said Leslie. "He smells awful." "You're ugly," Sammy replied. "Now, Sammy, that's no way to talk," said Mrs. Jules. "Leslie's a very pretty girl." "She's ugly," said Sammy. Allison spoke up. "Well, you smell terrible and are probably even uglier, but nobody can see you because you're hiding under that smelly old raincoat." "That will be enough of that," said Mrs. Jules. "Now, Sammy, why don't you take off your coat and hang it in the closet? Let's all see how nice you look." "I don't want to, you old windbag," said Sammy. "That's because he's so ugly," said Leslie. "I'm sure he's quite handsome," said Mrs. Jules. "He's just shy. Here, let me help you." Mrs. Jules took off Sammy's coat for him, but underneath it was another raincoat, even dirtier and smellier than the first one. They still couldn't see his face. "Ooh, now he smells even worse," said Mauricia. "You don't smell exactly like a rose either," Sammy replied. Mrs. Jules took off his second raincoat, but there was still another raincoat under that, and the smell became so bad that Mrs. Jules had to run and stick her head out the window just to get some fresh air. "You're all a bunch of pigs," Sammy screeched. "Dirty, rotten pigs." The smell was overpowering. Sammy just stood there, hidden under his raincoats. Mrs. Jules wrote Sammy's name under the word discipline. "Send him home on the kindergarten bus," said Joy. "Not with me," said Todd. Mrs. Jules held her nose, walked up to Sammy, and removed his raincoat. She threw it out the window, but he had on still another one. Sammy hissed, "Hey, you old windbag, watch where you throw my good clothes." Mrs. Jules put a check next to Sammy's name on the blackboard. Then she took off another raincoat and threw it out the window. The smell got worse, for he had on still another one. Sammy began to laugh. His horrible laugh was even worse than his horrible voice. When Sammy first came into the room, he was 4 feet tall, but after Mrs. Jules removed 6 of his raincoats, he was only 3 feet tall, and there were still more raincoats to go. Mrs. Jules circled his name and removed another coat. She threw it out the window. Then she put a triangle around the circle and threw another one of his coats out the window. She kept doing this until Sammy was only 1.5 feet high. With every raincoat she took off, Sammy's laugh got louder and louder, and the smell got worse. Some of the children held their ears. Others could hold only one ear because they were holding their nose with the other hand. It was hard to say which was worse, the laugh or the smell. Sammy stopped laughing and said, "Hey, old windbag, if you take off one more of my coats and throw it out the window, I'll bite your head off." "They smell too bad for me to allow them in my classroom," said Mrs. Jules. "You can pick them up when you leave." "They smell better than you do, pighead," Sammy shouted. Mrs. Jules didn't stop. She took off another one of his coats, then another and another. Sammy was only 4 inches tall, 3 inches tall, 2 inches tall. At last, she removed the final coat. All that was there was a dead rat. "Well, I don't allow dead rats in my classroom," said Mrs. Jules. She picked it up by the tail, put it in a plastic bag, and threw it away. Mrs. Jules didn't allow dead rats in her class. Todd once brought in a dead rat for show and tell, and Mrs. Jules made him throw that one away, too. I'm glad Sammy isn't allowed in our classroom, said Rondi. I don't like him very much. Yes, said Mrs. Jules. We caught another one. Dead rats were always trying to sneak into Mrs. Jules' class. That was the third one she'd caught since September. Chapter 15. Dee Dee. This story contains a problem and a solution. Dee Dee was a mousy-looking kid. Unlike most children at Wayside School, she liked recess better than spelling. As soon as the recess bell rang, she would jump up from her seat and run out the door. There were big signs in Wayside School on every floor. No jumping down the stairs. Dee Dee never seemed to notice those signs. She jumped down the stairs. Some children took the stairs 2 at a time. Dee Dee took them 10 at a time. That was on the way down. It was funny. She never seemed to be in quite the same hurry on the way back up. There was another sign at Wayside School. No cutting across the grass. Dee Dee must not have seen that one either. She cut across the grass and ran up to Louis, the yard teacher. I want a green ball, Dee Dee said. The green balls were the best. I'm all out of green balls, said Louis. Okay, then I want a red ball, said Dee Dee. The red balls were just about as good as the green balls. They didn't bounce as high, but actually, sometimes you don't want a ball to bounce too high. I'm all out of red balls, too, said Louis. Do you have anything left? Asked Dee Dee. Dee Dee meant anything besides the yellow ball. There was one yellow ball at Wayside School, and Louis was always trying to get rid of it. It didn't bounce, and it never went the way it was kicked. Anything at all? Said Dee Dee. Today is your lucky day, said Louis. I have one ball left, just for you. The one and only yellow ball. No thanks, said Dee Dee. Oh, come on, take it, said Louis. Why don't you ever have any green or red balls? Asked Dee Dee. I do, said Louis, but the other children ask first. By the time you get out here, they're all gone. But that's because I have to come all the way from the 30th story. How do you expect me to compete with the kids from the first or second? She asked. That's why I saved you the yellow ball, said Louis. Everybody wanted it, but I saved it just for you. I bet, said Dee Dee. She took the yellow ball and bounced it on the ground. It stopped dead with a thud. She stepped back, ran up, and kicked it. It went backwards over her head. She didn't bother chasing it. Instead, she played hopscotch with Jenny and Leslie. She thought it was disgusting. The next day, Dee Dee asked Mrs. Jules if she could go to recess early. Why? Asked Mrs. Jules. So I can get a green ball before Louis gives them all away, said Dee Dee. I'm glad you have a good reason, said Mrs. Jules. Yes, you may go. But first, spell Mississippi for me. Spelling was not Dee Dee's best subject. By the time she finally got it right, she was 5 minutes late for recess. She jumped down the stairs, cut across the grass, and ran up to Louis. There were no green balls left. There were no red balls either. However, there was still the yellow ball. Dee Dee played jump rope with Joy and Mauricia. It was no better than hopscotch. So Dee Dee's problem was to figure out a way to get a green ball, or at least a red ball. You already know that this story also contains a solution. Dee Dee figured it out. See if you can too. Remember everything you know about Dee Dee, Wayside School, and Mrs. Jules. Hint: the next day, Dee Dee brought a cream cheese and jelly sandwich, some nuts, and shredded cheese in her lunchbox. Here's what happened. Just before recess, Dee Dee smeared the cream cheese and jelly all over her face. Then she stuffed her mouth with nuts and hung the shredded cheese from her nose. When she closed her eyes, she looked just like a dead rat. Todd was in on the plan. Mrs. Jules, he called, there's a dead rat in the classroom. Mrs. Jules was very put out. I want that dead rat outside immediately. When Mrs. Jules said immediately, she meant it. Dee Dee instantly found herself outside on the playground. I want a green ball, she said. Louis pretended he hadn't heard her. May I please have a green ball? Asked Dee Dee. Louis gave her a green ball. I don't know how you did it, Dee Dee, but you're first today, he said. When Mrs. Jules found out that Dee Dee and Todd had tricked her, she sent Todd home early on the kindergarten bus. Dee Dee threw the green ball on the ground. It bounced 50 feet straight up in the air, and then she caught it. You don't like me, do you? She asked Louis. Sure I do, said Louis. No, you don't, said Dee Dee. Yes, I like you, said Louis. No, you don't, Dee Dee insisted. Yes, I like you. I really do, said Louis. Are you sure? Asked Dee Dee. Yes, said Louis. Don't you believe me? I guess so, said Dee Dee. Do you like me? Asked Louis. You bet, said Dee Dee. You're my best friend. Terrific, said Louis. I always wanted to be best friends with a dead rat. Chapter 16. DJ. DJ skipped up the 30 flights of stairs to Mrs. Jewell's room. He was grinning from ear to ear, from nose to chin, from here to there, and back again. Hey, DJ, Todd shouted. Glad to see you. Todd was a pushover for smiling faces. Mrs. Jewell heard him. She began to write Todd's name on the board under discipline, but when she saw DJ smile, she put down the chalk. Good morning, DJ, she said. What are you so happy about? DJ grinned and shrugged his shoulders. Mrs. Jewell smiled. Damien looked at the smile on Mrs. Jewell's face, then at Todd's, and finally at DJ's. Then Damien smiled, too. His smile was almost as big as DJ's. They were best friends. Once they saw the two of them smiling, the rest of the class couldn't help but smile. Roundy had a very cute one, due to her two missing front teeth. Nobody had an ugly smile. Jason came to school late. He was very upset, but the first thing he saw was Damien's smile, and then he felt a little bit better. Then he saw Roundy's toothless grin, and he began to smile a little himself. But when he saw the piano on DJ's face, he fell, laughing, onto the floor. Everybody started to laugh, even Kathy, and she hardly ever laughed except when someone hurt himself. The whole room seemed to be laughing, not just the people in it. The blackboard chuckled, the ceiling snickered, the desks were jumping up and down, and the chairs were slapping one another on the back. The floor was very ticklish. It laughed until the walls turned purple. The waste paper basket started to sing, and all the pencils stood up and danced. Finally, things began to settle down. Mrs. Jewell wiped her eyes and said, "Oh, DJ, why don't you tell the class why you were so happy? At least let us know what we are laughing about." But DJ kept on smiling. "Aw, come on, DJ," said Dee Dee. "Tell us." DJ didn't say a word. He couldn't. His mouth was stretched out of shape. "Let me guess," said Ron. "If we guess right, will you tell us?" DJ nodded his head. His smile began to hurt his ears. Everyone took one guess. "Have you been swimming? Is it your birthday? Are you in love? Did you get a green ball?" Nobody guessed right. At recess, DJ was still smiling. Louis, the yard teacher, called, "Hey, DJ, come here." They walked to the far corner of the playground where they were alone. "What's up, DJ?" Louis asked. DJ just smiled. "Come on, DJ, you can tell me. Why are you so happy?" DJ looked up at him. He said, "You need a reason to be sad. You don't need a reason to be happy." All right, guys, I think that's the perfect place to end. So, I would love for you to send me your spelling of the word Mississippi. And don't forget, you don't need a reason to be happy. All right, guys, we will continue next with Chapter 17. Can't wait. Bye.